It is the strangest thing about revenge. It does not warm you. It freezes. It leaves you with a void of pure air, like after a fire. If you're still here, don't just watch. Hit subscribe. You'll want to hear the rest, I promise you. I sat down at the table, surrounded by this white marble and the bottle green velvet walls, and I felt the weight of my handbag on the floor beside me. It was a black calfskin clutch, outwardly unremarkable, yet its heaviness had become my anchor these last few months. Inside, the ledgers. Not loose papers, no. Bound volumes, their fine paper having absorbed the ink of Owen Montgomery's lies for nearly 3 years. The room was a cube of polished silence. We were at the annual year-end investors' charity dinner at a private club in Mayfair, London. The silver fish knives reflected the dim light of the chandelier, casting a grid of cold gold onto the immaculate tablecloth. Owen was seated 2 places away from me. His profile, which I had once loved watching as he woke up, that strong jawline, that crease at the corner of his eye when he smiled, was now a sharp, soulless sketch. He was talking to Florence Bellamy, the chairwoman of the Ethics Committee. He laughed, that deep, easy laugh that could convince a bank to loan money to a man whose pockets were full of dust. Tonight, his laughter reminded me of ice cracking beneath a boot. I knew he was aware of my presence, of my composure. He had looked at me only once, the moment I took my seat. A quick, proprietary glance. The one he always used to remind me I was his shiny, well-educated accessory. I held his gaze, my pupils dilated with fatigue, and I plunged a silence so complete into his eyes that he looked away first. It wasn't a challenge, it was a statement. Death is always quiet. The white wine, an ice-cold Sancerre, arrived. I took a sip. The chill burned my throat, but I felt nothing else. That was exactly what I wanted. An elegant anesthesia. My mind drifted. A year and a half ago, I was Violet Audley, the successful young corporate lawyer. I had met Owen at the Royal Exchange on a typical rainy London day. He spilled his coffee on my cashmere coat, and 3 months later, I moved into his penthouse in Canary Wharf, the ring he gave me shining like a captured star. A ring I was still wearing tonight. It was platinum, set with a deep blue sapphire, the exact color of the sea after a storm. It was a promise, a cage. Betrayal, one imagines it as an explosion. A scream in the night, a broken glass. For me, it was a whisper. It was a night in July. He was on a business trip to Singapore, he had told me. I was alone in the large apartment. The air conditioning was too strong. I was looking for an extra blanket in Owen's dressing room, immense, dark, filled with bespoke suits and the scent of leather and woody cologne. That's where I found the key. It was at the bottom of a cufflink box, hidden beneath gray velvet. A small, aged brass key. Unmarked, unnumbered. It didn't fit anything in the apartment. My heart didn't skip a beat. It just slowed. It went from a rhythm of life to a rhythm of survival. I spent 3 weeks trying that key. A silent, methodical game without panic. I went to the post office boxes he rented. I checked an empty bank vault. Nothing. Until I remembered a conversation he'd had once with his partner, Benedict Shaw, about an old accounting office near Shoreditch that he used as a deposit for undigitized tax files. The office was on a nameless side street, above a print shop that smelled of dry ink and resin. The key turned in the lock without a sound, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment its entire life. The air inside was thick, cold, heavy with the scent of slowly decaying paper. Dust motes danced in the sparse shafts of light filtering through an opaque window. It was a forgotten room, filled with archive boxes dating back a decade, and in the center, a metal shelf. On that shelf were two heavy ledger books bound in black moleskin. They were not official company records. They were parallel ledgers. I opened the first one to the most recent page. It was handwritten, with exasperating precision and clarity. The amounts were staggering. This wasn't simple tax fraud. It was a complex money laundering system involving shell entities and illegal transfers to tax havens. The firm's money was being siphoned off from the bottom by suppliers who existed only on paper, all bearing the initials M and S for Montgomery and Shaw. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the cold floor, my coat wrapped around me. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shocked. I was grateful. Grateful that the betrayal was so total, so overwhelming, that it had freed me from doubt. I remembered what Owen had done to me long before I knew it. 6 months after we started dating, I had pitched my own ethical investment fund project to the firm. It was my baby, the culmination of all my studies. Owen had looked at it with an affectionate smile, congratulated me on my passion, and then buried it, arguing it was too risky for the time being. At the time, I believed him. I trusted him. He was the man who every morning made my Earl Grey tea at the exact time I needed to start my day. How could a man who measured time with such precision in our lives steal the future of others? I returned to that Shoreditch office 4 nights in a row. I photographed every page, every transaction. I wasn't just copying data. I was learning the cadence of their lie. Benedict Shaw, the partner, was the meticulous accountant, his signature small and cramped at the bottom of each transfer. Owen, however, was the strategist, his signature large, bold, almost flamboyant. He signed not to justify, but to own the crime. I discovered something else, something colder than money. In 2018, the firm had managed the portfolio of the Albright family, Tabitha Albright's family, a close university friend. Tabitha had lost her entire fortune, and her family was ruined when their investment fund mysteriously imploded. At the time, the official story was that the Albright family had taken an overly risky bet on emerging markets. The ledger said otherwise. They detailed a series of forced panic sales by Owen and Benedict aimed at liquidating Albright's assets for the benefit of a shell corporation managed by Benedict Shaw. It wasn't a management error, it was targeted plunder. Tabitha had left London, broken, without ever understanding what had happened to her. I remembered her face the last time I saw her, at the cafe. She had the look of someone who can't breathe. She said, "I don't understand, Violet. My father put his whole life into this. How can everything just vanish?" I hugged her, helpless, and cursed the market. I should have cursed the man holding my hand a few hours later. Tonight, the ring on my finger was no longer a sapphire. It was a tiny lens of truth, frozen around my knuckle. It constantly reminded me of the price of naivety. At the table, the master of ceremonies, a jovial man, stood up for the annual toast. "Dear friends, as we conclude this year, let's take a moment for gratitude. Each of us in turn, what are you thankful for tonight?" The parlor game began. The answers flowed, all perfect. "I'm thankful for the resilience of the market," said Felix Dalton, the operations director. "I'm thankful for my family, of course, and for good wine," added Florence Bellamy. "For health," murmured an old banker. The ritual played out slowly, circling the mahogany table. Each word was an extra layer of varnish on a cracked facade. My heart was a deaf chamber, but my senses were on high alert. I heard the rustle of silk as Eliza Harrington crossed her legs. I smelled the perfume of truffles on the main course. And I watched Owen. He was perfectly relaxed. He knew I was here for a reason, but he was incapable of conceiving that reason could be his destruction. He believed in his own impunity. He believed I loved him. And above all, he believed I was stupid. The silence approached me. My turn. I set down my glass, the minuscule sound of crystal meeting linen. I straightened my back, my lawyer's posture. I wasn't here as a humiliated lover. I was here as an executioner. I could feel the weight of Owen's gaze on me now. He had that small smile, the kind he gave me when he knew I was about to say something charming or intelligent that would reflect well on him. "Violet?" the host asked, his smile patient. I paused, just long enough for the silence to thicken and settle like cold oil. They asked what I was thankful for. I looked directly at Owen, without hatred, without any visible emotion, as if observing a specimen under a microscope. I said, "For finally having proof." Owen's smile froze, like a poorly exposed photograph. He understood immediately. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a password. The room went silent, a silence, different from the one before. This one was heavy, filled with chilling curiosity, the predatory instinct awakening in the other sharks at the table. Benedict Shaw, seated opposite, dropped his bread. The small sound went unnoticed, crushed by the pressure of the moment. I continued my sentence, my voice calm, soft, carried by the room's reverberation. Proof, dear friends, that there is still justice, even when it must be served by a single hand, and that the truth is much more concrete than money. My gaze returned to Owen. His eyes had narrowed, his pupils dark, his complexion ashen. He gave me a barely perceptible nod, a silent command. "Stop." I smiled, a movement of the mouth devoid of warmth, and ignored the signal. I opened my bag. I did it slowly, with the same care as if drawing a weapon. I took out the 2 black moleskin-bound books. They were so heavy, I held them with both hands. Their texture, soft and worn, was familiar. Inside were the old ledger books, every illegal payment with their signatures. I slid them onto the mahogany table. The dull, heavy thud of the books meeting the wood was the loudest sound of the evening. I slid the first book toward Florence Bellamy. "Florence, dear friend, take a look at pages 42 to 58. The Albright transactions, just before their ruin. That's Benedict's signature there, small and neat." I turned the second book and slid it toward another board member. "And here," my voice became slightly rougher, the only sign of the effort it took to stay upright, "the funds diverted to finance the cover-up of that very illegal transfer. Look at that signature, Owen. Large, bold, yours." Chaos did not erupt immediately. In these circles, scandal is always a slow process, filtered by disbelief and the maintenance of appearances. People weren't shouting. They were leaning in. Their eyes swept the pages. The whispers were like razor blades slipping under doors. Owen, for his part, did not move. He finally took a deep breath, and I saw him struggling to retrieve his mask. "Violet," his voice was incredibly low, a predator's whisper. "This is a mistake. These are outdated drafts. Let's discuss it at home." I cut him off without raising my tone. "No, Owen, no mistake. And no home. The only thing outdated is your facade." I remembered that day, a few weeks prior. I had the evidence. I had the books. I only needed to know why. I had waited for him in the living room, the ring on my finger, a glass of water in my hand. "Where were you the night of March 14th, 2018? I had asked him. He raised an eyebrow, loosening his tie. "In Boston, for the conference. You know that." "No, you left for Boston on the 15th. On the 14th, you were in London." He smiled, a look of weary dominance. "Ah, Violet, the lawyer rides again. Let it go. I must have had dinner with a client, then left early for the airport. Why the obsession with dates?" I put down my glass. I saw the water barely move, barely a ripple. That was the state of my soul at that moment. The night of March 14th, 2018, I said, my voice like chalk. You were making sure the Albrights lost every penny. But that's not the worst of it, is it? Money is easy. The ring is beautiful. I loved it. But what drove you to do it? He remained silent. He didn't deny the Albrights. He only denied the emotion behind the act. It was a business opportunity, Violet. They were a risk to the firm. I managed them. I closed my eyes, feeling the fatigue hit me like a punch to the stomach. Money was a pretext. The laundering was only a means. The real reason was nested deeper in what I had discovered by dissecting the oldest transactions. I opened my eyes again at the Mayfair table. Owen was getting up. He was trying to reach for the books. "This is slander," he shouted, but the word was weak, almost a gurgle. Benedict Shaw, pale, was trying to hide behind Florence Bellamy. "Sit down, Owen." I pronounced his name as if it were a title of property I was foreclosing on. "It's over." I looked past him, towards the back of the room. The servers had stopped moving. Everyone was looking at the books, that tangible proof, smelling of damp and dust, laid out there under the golden lights of luxury. I picked up my water glass and added, with perfect elegance, "I'm not finished yet. Laundering is one thing, betrayal is another, but there is a darker secret, isn't there, Owen? And it's not in the amounts, it's hidden in the omission. The twist. It had to be subtle, surgical." I took a deep breath, feeling the sapphire press against my skin. I checked the dates. I checked the cash flows. The money you and Benedict stole from the Albrights wasn't just used to enrich yourselves. It was used to buy silence. Silence about what you did to Caleb Fox. The name. Caleb Fox. Another younger lawyer 4 years ago. He fell from a terrace during a drunken company party. Accidental death, the inquest concluded. I remember your unwellness that year, Owen. A depressive state, you said. You were afraid Caleb was seeing too much. He was starting to ask questions about the dormant funds. He was getting too close. I pulled out of my bag, to the general surprise, one single photograph. It was old, faded. A photo of Caleb Fox, smiling, and behind him, a large whiteboard showing, half-masked by his head, a rough financial diagram, the laundering diagram. I reviewed his personal files, the ones you had sealed, supposedly to protect the firm. I found this picture. Look closely at the board behind him. It's the first iteration of your diversion structure, isn't it? The same as in these books, a few months later. I leaned over the table, my heart pounding now. Not from fear, but from the cold power of the truth. On March 14th, 2018, the night you ruined the Albrights, it wasn't a business trip. It was the day after Caleb confronted you with his initial findings. And you weren't in Boston. You were in Paris. And you were with the man who sold Caleb the alcohol he shouldn't have been drinking. The money stolen from the Albrights was used to pay for that silence, to erase the traces of the man you placed in a position to fall to preserve your system. You ruined my friend's family, not out of pure greed, but to cover up a disguised murder. Owen finally tipped backward, his chair hitting the marble floor in an obscene crash that shattered the formal silence. The facade was gone. Just a naked, exposed man. My gaze remained fixed on him. Watching him empty of all substance was the only form of warmth I felt. That is the proof. It is not what you hold in your hand, it is what you force the other to let go of. I stood up, leaving the books, the scandal, and the void in the middle of the feast. The sapphire on my ring felt lighter than a feather. I'm grateful, I said one last time, my voice a renewed whisper, addressing the entire room and the man on the floor, to finally have been able to give a name to cowardice, Owen. It bears your name. I walked away. I didn't look back. The sound of murmurs and overturned chairs behind me was the heavy, satisfying noise of a closing door. Revenge is a strange thing. It doesn't fill the void, but it makes it clean. It leaves me tired, lucid. I walk down the street, alone under the cold lights of Mayfair. If this story still echoes in you, stay. Subscribe. There is always another secret, elegantly veiled in the dark, waiting for its confession.